You're listening to Docs Outside the Box, episode 57.
Welcome to Docs Outside the Box podcast. This is your official show, looking inside the minds of cutting-edge and innovative doctors. Think you'll find these stories in any medical textbook? Sorry. You're getting real life insight from men and women pushing the envelope beyond medicine. Ordinary doctors doing extraordinary things. Let's start now with your host, Dr. Nee Darko.
This episode is brought to you by Set for Life Insurance. Protect yourself against life setbacks with Set for Life Insurance. Set for Life Insurance gets you disability and life insurance at a reduced cost with their exclusive discounts. Now that's why I use them. Visit www.setforlifeinsurance.com and tell them Dr. Darko sent you. Everybody, what's good? Welcome back to episode 57 of Docs Outside the Box. I am the Doc Outside the Box, Dr. Nee Darko. Look, before we get into the next episode, please, I want you to go back, take a listen to episode 56 with Dr. Rob Gore. Dr. Rob Gore is the executive director, the founder of the Kings Against Violence Initiative. It is a youth violence prevention in the heart of Brooklyn, and he's doing some very important work down there. He is a heavy hitter, someone who has received accolades from CNN. He was just named a CNN hero. He's been doing TED Talks. He's been featured on the History Channel. If you go to the show notes section of his episode 56, you'll see some embedded videos from YouTube there. You can go and check him out. But like I said, he is making a huge impact in his own community, and it really was inspiring to hear him share his blueprint, and what I say is the blueprint to have a large impact in your community, especially when you don't have resources or any funding at all. So it's definitely a must listen. Now, on today's episode, we're going to be speaking with Dr. Mike Natter. He is known for what he can draw, what he can illustrate in his sketchbook, as opposed to what he's putting into his notebook. Now, Dr. Mike Natter, he's been following his dreams. He's been following his heart, and it's really starting to pay dividends for him right now. And we're going to hear about how Mike has been proving people wrong since being a pre-med. We're going to hear about how he had difficulty getting into medical school, and how once he got into medical school, he was able to excel at understanding the very difficult concepts by being able to make his own drawings, his own illustrations to make these concepts a lot easier to understand, even to the point where his classmates use his illustrations to study. Now, currently, he is an internal medicine resident at NYU, but it's his drawings in medical school that made him an overnight sensation on social media. And if you check out his IG page right now, the links will be in the show notes. He's got over 77,000 followers. I'm like, damn, I need some of those right now. His journey started as an art major, and he also had an interest in psychology. Now, the question is how do you go from being an art major, an interest in psychology, to becoming a physician? Well, Dr. Natter, he is a type 1 diabetic and has always had an interest in medicine, and that began to steer him towards becoming a physician. But it looks as though after hearing this episode, you'll see that it's his right brain that's really been winning out. Now, pre-meds, I know you're going to like this episode. I know you've been reaching out to me saying that you're looking for someone who's a little bit closer to where you guys are at, med school, as well as being a resident. So he's going to talk about the bumpy road to getting into medical school, as well as not really listening to the naysayers. Before we get into that episode, though, really quickly, I want you all to continue to follow me on social. For those who are listening and not, we are at Docs Outside the Box on Instagram, on Twitter, as well as on Facebook. We are at DocsOTB, and you can use the hashtag I'm not just a doc when sharing. So go ahead, whenever you're listening, take a screenshot and let me know, tag me, and I'll be sure to share that. Now, look, I'm counting on you guys each week to help the community to grow. I really appreciate seeing those mentions on Instagram or whatever social media platform each week. But think about it. Every time you share this episode with someone, every time you put it on social media, you're making it a lot more easier. It's becoming a lot more normalized for other docs to say, I'm not just a doc. So you see, we all play a role in that, and I love it. So without further ado, let's get on with the interview. I introduce Dr. Mike Natter. Dr. Mike Natter, welcome to Docs Outside the Box, man.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey, man, we have been highly anticipating getting you on the show for a while. I think it's really amazing what you're doing, not only within medicine, but also outside of medicine, almost like you have like a dual lives going on. But before we get so much into the nitty gritty of what you do, can you take a quick opportunity just to let us know where you're from, what college you went to, med school, things like that?
Sure. So I'm born and raised in New York City.
New York?
New York, man. Yeah, Upper West Side, represent.
Okay.
I actually started my academic career as an artist. So I went to a place called Skidmore College where I studied studio art, and then kind of found neuroscience while I was doing studio art there.
Wait. How did you do? Wait. You can't just take that leap. How did you do that?
Well, all right. So the story with that is actually interesting. So I really didn't know what to major in, and I always had a passion for art, and I found myself taking all the art classes. And in the art classes, these students around me were phenomenal. So I felt like, if anything, I was bottom of the class. But in art, it almost didn't matter, and you kind of just did it, and it felt right. And I would bring home these huge charcoal drawings of naked ladies. And my parents, who were always so supportive of my artistic bend, were a little bit concerned in that they were funding my college tuition. And they said, honey, this is a lot of money to draw naked ladies. Let's see if there's anything else in addition that you'd be interested in studying. So, I thought that was reasonable. And I didn't really know what to do. So I took a bunch of psych classes. And I found that I really was not interested in psych until we had a lecture on the brain. And that's when everything kind of clicked. I was like amazed by the brain. So I actually ended up, my major was actually a neuropsychology major, because at that time I was so timid with the hard sciences and so kind of conditioned to think that I was not really good at art, at science and math. And I was not really smart, to be honest. So I didn't want to take calculus. I didn't want to take organic chemistry. I didn't think I could. And in doing neuropsychology, I could take all the upper level neuroscience classes and skip, all those basic classes. And so that's kind of how I ended up basically doing the neuropsychology as well as studio art.
Now, Mike, where did those thoughts come from? Because you mentioned not feeling confident to take the prerequisites. Did that come from your own thoughts, or were you told this at a younger age that you just didn't have the skills to take these type of classes?
Yeah, so it was a little bit of both. It was more from an external kind of negativity, to be honest. So I, my whole life growing up, there's no medicine in my family. My whole life growing up, my natural inclination was always more toward the arts and the humanities. I kind of would excel at drawing and writing and reading, but I was like really just bad at math and science. And, my teachers would tell me, in a nice way, like, this is not your thing. You're just not a math person.
Right.
Like as a grammar school kid, I'm like, sure, yeah, I agree, and then, I would take the remedial classes, and I would be in like the different track in the math classes, and I would get, very mediocre grades in science. And it never really mattered. It never bummed me out. It never kind of upset me. I just kind of accepted it, and my parents were also very much accepting. They said, it's okay. You're just not a math person. So I was always actually very interested in medicine for many reasons, but mainly because I'm a type 1 diabetic and I was diagnosed in childhood. And so that kind of spawned this interest and this kind of romance with medicine. But I just never kind of thought that I could be a doctor. I thought it was kind of out of the question.
Now, how did you, okay, so then let's jump back into Skidmore, where you're doing what, neuropsych?
Neuropsych and art, yeah.
Neuropsych and art. You graduate. When did you decide that you wanted to be a physician? Now, was this during Skidmore or is this afterwards?
So I'll be honest with you. Dr. Darko, I kind of think I always wanted to be a doctor. I just never thought I could. It was kind of like when you're growing up as a kid and you would, you thought about like an astronaut, and it's like, wow, like this sense of awe will wash over you and you'll think, wow, what an amazing thing. I would love to do that. But you kind of know that you never will. And I kind of felt like that's what, being a doctor was to me. So when I started taking these neuroscience classes and started to actually excel in them, and I was doing quite well academically, which for the first time in my life I was doing well in science classes that were relatively complicated. It wasn't until then I kind of gained this academic confidence in myself, and I realized that maybe I'm not so dumb, and maybe what people said initially isn't necessarily all that true.
That's something that is that's a story that I can relate to. I struggled myself in college with the specific sciences for the prerequisites, right? So I struggled with biochemistry. I struggled with organic chemistry. It wasn't until I got into medical school and started understanding the way how science applies to actual human body that it
Hmm.
really made sense. It's almost like what you're saying. Once you develop the passion for it, it would became so much easier for you, right?
Exactly, and I think that's part of the downfall of the whole system, where we're learning these very very abstract sciences that are very kind of peripherally related, if at all, to medicine in many ways. And I think for me, because I was interested in medicine, I couldn't, like what you were saying, like really attach that same passion and connection to learning about atoms and learning about organic molecules and all
Mm.
these things.
I love that point. I love that point. I think there's going to be a lot of pre-meds who are listening like, what? He gets me. Dr. Nat is my spirit. Is my what did they say? My spirit animal or something?
Spirit animal, yeah. Hashtag spirit animal. Uh, yeah. So so I kind of always had that passion to go to medicine, but I never thought I could. And then pretty much my end of my junior year, I said, I'm about to graduate soon. I want to try this. I want to be a doctor. I have the confidence now, and I had this kind of epiphany. It was kind of like the clouds parted and the sun shone down. I said, I'm going to do this, and I finally had this kind of confidence. So right after undergrad, I went into a post-bac pre-medical program back home in New York City at Columbia.
And there are some pre-meds who, well, actually, no, let me tell you a story real quick. So, because the reason I want you to describe this is because I didn't know what post-bac was until I got into medical school. So I applied to medical school twice. One of the medical schools that I applied to the first time rejected me and gave me an application for post-bac. I was like, what is this? I don't even know what post-bac was. I threw that application away and spent the next 2 years struggling to try to figure out what I was going to do. And I eventually got in. And it wasn't until I got in and I met all these different, first years who were like, yeah, I did a post-bac X, I did post-bac Y. I'm like, wait, what? And I just go back to that memory of me throwing things away. So please, Dr. Natter, take an opportunity. Can you tell pre-meds what post-bac is?
Absolutely, yeah. I was unaware of it myself until I started kind of looking into how I could apply to medical school, not having taken any of the prerequisites. There actually are a handful of medical schools that will accept you through like this humanities program, but they're very far and few between. I actually think Mount Sinai might be one of them in New York. But basically, if you're someone like myself who has literally taken great steps to step around all the prerequisites for medical school, and you haven't taken them. Or maybe you were in a career and you realized that you wanted to change paths and become a doctor and you hadn't taken any of the prereqs. They're basically these 1 to 2 year programs where you are just essentially taking just those classes, and they're structured differently at different institutions. For Columbia's, they basically just kind of melded you into the undergrad, and there was this kind of great divide between the post-bacs who were the salt and peppered kids with the beard sitting in the front row. All the classes they took were only the prereqs, and then there's all these young, 18-year-old kids who hated us because they had a full course load plus what we were taking, and we would kill the curve usually. So it was interesting, but it was just those classes. Some would offer you some, guidance or MCAT prep or some help with your application, and others were really just kind of more free flowing. I have a lot of friends who just kind of piecemeal took the classes that they needed to and didn't do a formal post-bac. But I also have friends who did pre-med and undergrad but wanted to bolster their grades. So there's different kind of reasons to go into a post-bac.
So then from there, then once you finished your post-bac, you decided to, when did you apply to medical school?
So I struggled. I think you and I relate on many levels. I struggled to get into medical school.
Mm-hmm.
And I recall the transition from Skidmore, which had, the class sizes were like 15 kids and the professor knew your name and you would get beers with them after class kind of thing, to going into these large auditoriums with hundreds of students. The professor had no idea who you were. There was very little interaction. And I'm taking these very difficult classes, and all of a sudden you get these scores back, and I'll never forget I got this little blue book back my calculus exam, and on the front it said 56. So I said, "Oh my God, I'm failing! Like this is it. I can't even go. I can't pass the first class." And I opened the book up, and that was a B plus because of the curve. And I was like, I don't understand. It didn't make sense to me. It didn't register. So that was my first experience with curves, and it was just a very kind of disheartening experience. And it became more cutthroat and competitive, and I really kind of disliked the process. I thought it was very antithetical to the types of people I want to be a physician. It's this very kind of, I need this A and I'll step on your back to get kind of thing. And I didn't like that. And I became really discouraged. And my grades were good, but not great. They were mediocre, and they were not in the realm of what they want. Like they wanted you to have basically all A's, and I was not achieving them. But I was still very proud of myself that I was doing how well I was doing for myself, but it wasn't good enough. And I was becoming very discouraged, and it was very depressing. And I realized that the medical school application process it flattens the whole human being into two dimensions of GPA and MCAT. And then after that hurdle, they'll open up your application and be like, oh, are they a good person? Are they things outside of this? And I became very discouraged, and I became very kind of depressed during that process. And I said to myself, I'll never forget, I said to myself, whatever happens in this process, if I end up getting into medical school, I will do so on my terms, and I will not lose who I am, and I will not turn into some of these kids who, would cheat or whatever they would do to get in. Because to me, the whole purpose was I was going into medicine to help people and to do things my way, and I didn't want to fall into that kind of chasm of people that were doing it just to hang that degree on the wall and just to have that GPA and that kind of stuff.
It sounds like you stuck to that motto so far. You haven't changed a bit.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Now, tell us about the interview process, because I heard that you interviewed at one medical school. This is the medical school that accepted you, but it was very unique. It was very different. Can you describe that? Talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I applied to about 30 schools, and I was working up at Columbia Presbyterian as a medical technician at the time, and I will never forget.
It's a small world. When I was a kid, that's where I used to get my shots.
Is that right?
Oh yeah.
Oh wow. Are you from?
Yeah, I grew up in Queens, but a small portion of my life was in Fort Washington, New York.
Mm-hmm.
Right around Fort Washington Ave. And then from there we moved to Queens, and then from there moved to New Jersey. So very, very small world. Now I'm a lot older than you, but now take us through the medical school interview process, particularly your interview at Jefferson Medical School. Something happened that was really unique.
Sure. Yeah. So, kind of as we spoke about, I did relatively mediocre in my pack. My MCATs also did not go terribly well. I did okay, but I was not at the kind of like the cutoffs that the post-bac program would have preferred in terms of when you apply. So I applied broadly. And I was collecting rejection after rejection after rejection, and I was getting extremely depressed, but also just kind of annoyed that I felt as though as soon as I clicked submit, it would turn around with a rejection, as though they were waiting for my money for the associated fee for the application fee, and not actually reading like why I want to be a doctor and why I'm going to be good at being a doctor. So it was quite depressing. But what Columbia's postbac did was they had these like med school fairs, and they would invite the deans of admissions from a handful of local schools to come by. So my buddy, who actually was working with me at Columbia Presbyterian, who was also in his gap year, he's like, "Come on, throw on a tie, we're gonna go." And I said, forget all this. This is such BS. They don't look at you. And he's like, "All right, enough, let's go." And he kind of convinced me to go. So I pretty much went up to every table that I still had active applications at, and I shook the hands of the admissions officers, and I said, "Listen, med school X is my first choice, and I'd love to be here." And, some of them had the gall to just ask me at that point, "Oh, well, what's your MCAT and what's your GPA?" And it just boiled down to that time and time again. And when I would tell them, some of them even told me to my face, "There's no way you're going to get in. Try retaking classes or retaking your MCAT and try again next year." So I was annoyed, and I was about to leave, and the Jefferson's table was right by the exit. I was about to leave, and I said, "Oh, Jefferson, I've heard good things. Let me talk to them. And Dr. Brooks, who at the time was the admissions dean, was so different. She stood up, she came around the table, she shook my hand, she looked me in the eye, she asked me, what my name was. And immediately, I felt like there was a warmth that was very different. It was a palpable warmth. And I said, listen, if you look at my numbers, you'll reject me, but I know that I'm going to be a good doctor, and I really think I'd be a good fit at Jefferson. And she said, I like you. What are your numbers? Maybe we can work with stuff. And I told her my numbers, and she wasn't initially too scared away, but she did say to me, what else are you doing outside of all this? And, I didn't even realize that something that had no connection to medicine would have any impact on my application process. And so I didn't necessarily highlight a lot of my artistic stuff in my applications.
I mean, why would you though, right? I mean, they don't ask those questions on the application, really.
They don't. Yeah, they don't highlight that. They don't make that any kind of priority. And I think a lot of meds will, not necessarily like pad their resumes, but they'll do things that they think are medically related to show their interest or to show their expertise in some sort of math and science or medical field. Very seldom will they say like, I like to sculpt or I like to dance and this relates because of this, or if it doesn't relate, it still has value. So I at the time, this is like very nerdy of me. I grew up reading comic books, and I had always wanted to make my own comic book about a diabetic superhero named Captain Langerhans. And for those who are unfamiliar with Langerhans, those are the cells in the pancreas that produce, or where the beta cells are found that produce insulin. And I thought it would be like a really nice kind of mechanistic way to teach newly diagnosed kids like what the illness is and why they got it and how to treat it and these types of things. And I found time at that point in my life to actually sit down and do it. So I was creating this comic book, and I said, well, I'm making this comic book about, a diabetic superhero and all this stuff. And she really latched onto that, and she loved it. And she thought that was really kind of like the caliber of student she wanted at Jefferson, being a little bit, more creative and forward thinking. So she said, listen, here's my card, like, let's keep talking. And basically she was able to take my file from the rejection pile and get me an interview. And I was not granted an interview at any other MD school of the 30 that I applied to. So
wow, so you got a foot in the door right there.
Got a foot in the door. And it was amazing because it had nothing to do with my MCAT, had nothing to do with my GPA, it had nothing to do with any publications or any of that. It had to do with talking to someone, a face-to-face encounter, and telling them about something that I'm passionate about that has nothing to do with medicine.
It's a really good story. Now, once you got into medical school, let's say you're a first year, you've got tons of information in front of you. It's like, how do they describe it? It's like drinking water from a fire hydrant, right?
Yes.
You got tons and tons of information. How did you have time? When did you start really drawing? When did that take off? Take us through that process.
So it's something. So I've been drawing pretty much my whole life, and it's something that I would always kind of do in my studies, but it wasn't something I kind of formalized doing. And when I was exactly how you described, you get thrown in. Our first course was anatomy, and it was a beast, and it was the most information I've ever had to digest and regurgitate in my life. And I caved because here I am, feeling like I got in skin of my teeth back door into medical school, feeling like maybe I don't really belong, maybe I'm not smart enough, maybe I got in through some stroke of luck. So I have this major imposter syndrome sitting on my shoulders. And the last thing I wanted to do was to, prove all those naysayers right and fail out or not do well or not excel. And I wanted to take advantage of this opportunity. So I caved into the more traditional kind of study techniques that I saw my peers and my colleagues doing, which was essentially kind of typing up a one-page summary of whatever lecture we had, and then memorizing that. It is essentially the way to go about that. So I kind of started that way. I did okay, not stellar. But what I did find is that while I was studying, I was making these little doodles on the margins of my page. And when the test would come, I found that I was really quite good at remembering those little cartoons I drew and not so good at remembering the text that I tried to memorize.
You're a visual learner.
And that's when it really kind of clicked for me that, maybe I should, kind of indulge a little bit more in this. And then by the beginning of my second year, I was so isolated in the library, and it was becoming very kind of alone, and it was very isolating. So I said, the only way that I can really make this enjoyable and not lose my mind is if I do it my way. So I bought a sketchbook. I threw out my notebooks. I stopped taking notes on the computer, and I literally drew anything and everything that I could. And I still would take handwritten notes, but for the most part, I was drawing, and it made the process enjoyable. But to my surprise, I think to my peers' surprise, I actually did really well, and it helped me excel in medical school, and I did it in a really fun way.
So yeah, so what did your peers say? Like they had to have like been chuckling at first and laughing at
I would
first.
get stopped, and this would always kind of irk me a little bit. Like I would get stopped in the library, and a friend of mine would be like, like, you see you're drawing over there. Like when are you gonna study? And I'm like, I am studying. This is how I study. And they would kind of see that as like I would be procrastinating, or they were like, oh, like good luck. But then what would end up happening was I would the illustrations that I thought were actually really kind of clever and helpful. I would post them onto my Facebook, which is the only social media platform I had at the time. And my friends, after some of the exams, would come up to me and say, your cartoon got me a couple points. Like I got questions right from it.
And real quick, because you're really understating your cartoons and your drawing, because your drawings, I was looking at them, they're like almost like Natter caliber type things. You know what I'm saying? Like this is really good stuff, and they're very interesting.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that a lot. Having the Natter comparison is like truly the highest compliment that someone can pay.
I mean, you're Natter, and then he's Natter.
It's uncanny. It is uncanny. And I'm pretty sure he's from the Upper West Side too.
I think he's from New York. He was a smoker though. I hope you don't smoke though.
No. Yeah. He was a cigar guy. Not for me. But yeah, so that's when things really turned around for me, and that's when I kind of clicked and kept going with it.
Like when did it start popping off, right? Because obviously, like you put it on Facebook, and then like something big happened. Tell us, dude. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit older since I did the post back, and I worked a couple years in between my gap years. So I feel like I wasn't really in that Instagram, Twitter generation as much as some of my peers were. So I in my mind, and this is kind of embarrassing, I kind of thought, why, if I have Facebook, which is essentially Twitter and Instagram in one, why would I want to have more platforms to manage and deal with? Like I just want to click on one thing and do it all from there. So I didn't really see the purpose in having more. A friend of mine who was actually an artist, she kind of mentioned to me, she's like, you can post your medical illustrations on Instagram, and you can hashtag them and kind of like label them. So in my mind, the novice that I was under the impression that, this will be great for when I start studying for step one. And if I hashtag my heart drawing cardiology, and I click the cardiology hashtag, I'll see just my heart drawings, and I could study from those. And little did I know I was getting the billions of cardiology related posts on Instagram. But that's when it kind of started. So I started posting, and I had a handful of followers, maybe 100 or 200 or whatever it was. But I was doing it more kind of selfishly to categorize my illustrations for my own study purposes. And it wasn't until I got an email from Buzzfeed. They were doing this writer who she had gone to my high school. She was a couple years below me. And she said that she saw some of my work online on Facebook. And she said, I'm doing this piece on people who doodle in class. Can I use some of your doodles? I was like, yeah, sure. I didn't really think much of it. Some weeks passed by. I don't hear, kind of forgot about it. And then she comes back and she says, I think I might want to just do a piece on you. I think your story is really interesting. And I was like, what do you mean, like my story on me, So she made this just really sweet, really flattering kind of expose on like my journey to medical school and like my illustrations through medical school. And at the very bottom, she threw my handle in there. And I went from a handful of followers to an astonishing like 10,000 literally overnight, and it was crazy.
So you literally became like a superstar overnight.
I wouldn't call it a super. I think I became. I had a lot more eyeballs looking at my illustrations overnight.
How did I feel?
It was flattering. It was really flattering because what was coming out of it was, here I am, the art kid who, feels like he doesn't belong and feels like I'm just kind of skating by and feeling I'm this big imposter. And here I am having this kind of outpouring of support and people really appreciating my work. But more than that, I'm having people who were very much in my shoes in the post-bac or in pre-med reaching out to me and saying, like, I keep getting rejected and like your story is so uplifting and I really appreciate it. There's so many people that struggle to get into medical school and many who just don't. And I think it's not really spoken about and it's not really, advertised. And I think also on social media, oftentimes we see these like idealized versions of what people want to see and it's very kind of fake. And I think I very much air my shortcomings and I wear my my self-consciousness on my sleeve. And I think people kind of took to that and really, really appreciated it. And so I think it was a nice, it was like a nice full circle for me.
I think the more personal you are on social media, it's all about relatability, I think. And I think there's going to be people who are going to relate to the flashy cars and the watches and, being the only person sitting on a solo private jet. But then I think there are a lot more people who relate to what you just said, being just human and wearing your emotions sometimes on your sleeve. So I really love that answer. It's a great answer.
Thank you.
Now, since then, what's been your favorite piece of art that you've drawn?
Oh man. I've made a lot of work and I feel like it's kind of like choosing your favorite kid. Like, I don't know if I have like a favorite, like each one kind of evokes different things. What I find really interesting is sometimes I'll draw something that I think is like well rendered and clever and like has great shading and cross hatching or whatever. And I'll throw it out there on the internet and like I'll get very few, it doesn't seem to do very well. People don't really seem to be interested in it. And then I'll do this thing on a napkin that's stupid. And I'm like, this is silly. And I'll throw it up and this huge like outpouring of like, oh, this is great. And I'm like, really? Like, that's what you like? But I mean, some of the pieces that are the most meaningful for me would probably be I did a self-portrait in One Touch Ultra test strips, like for blood glucose testing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that for me was it had a lot of weight to it because there was a lot of kind of meaning. There's a lot of meaning. It had a lot to do with the microcosm of being diabetic and the macrocosm of being more than just your disease. And I think that had a lot of impact, and I think it turned out quite well. So I was really happy with that one.
Now, have you ever drawn any caricatures of like your attendings or professors?
Yeah, all the time.
that you've put public, that you've made public?
No, I don't bill myself as a realist by any means, and so I don't think that my illustrations of like my portraiture skills are lacking. So they don't look like the people that I draw oftentimes. And so I'm always very reluctant to put those out there just that there's enough recognizability for someone to see it and be offended. But no, I have. And I think I found that like when I'm anxious or when I'm bored or when my mind starts to wander, especially on rounds, I find that I'm drawing and I don't even realize it. And especially if we table round, I'll sit there and on my sign out or on my, my sheet for the day, I just have a million illustrations by the end of rounds. And sometimes they're quite related to what's going on with the patient and stuff. And sometimes I find myself doodling the patient, which I would never post. But it helps me not only focus, but it helps me kind of synthesize the information. There was one time that a lot of my illustrations have become kind of cathartic for me. And I struggled in my third year clerkship in surgery. And I did an illustration of me just getting reamed in the OR by this attending. And I made the attending this demonic character. So clearly was not recognizable. But it was amazing to me because I posted it and I would get these responses from people at my institution saying, I know who that is. And they knew who that was because they had the same interaction with that person. And I ended up taking it down only because the fact that it could potentially be traced back to that attending, I didn't want any repercussions. But I was so bothered by the fact that it was a kind of ritualized thing where, the attending would really kind of choose one student and pick on them the whole 6 weeks. And it was tough. It was really tough.
It's unfortunate that those type of personalities still exist in medicine. And I think the days of them thriving in medicine are over, but they're still there, spattered throughout, medical education.
I agree. I agree.
Now, look, we're getting towards the end of our interview. I'm going to ask you some quick, fast fire questions. Just tell me what comes off of the dome piece. Don't think too much about it. You down?
I'm down. Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. All right, what's one thing you want people to learn from this podcast?
To not listen to people that say you can't get in, you can't do it, you can't pursue your dream. There's always an option, whether it be going a different route but staying in medicine, or whether finding another passion within the initial one. There's always an option. Don't listen to people say you can't.
I love it. I love it. And what about the students, particularly the pre-med students who hear that, quote unquote, they're not smart enough? What say you, Dr. Natter? What do you say about them?
You can't listen to these people. I think unfortunately there's this misnomer that you have to be brilliant to get into medical school. You have to take these very difficult classes that are you're made to think have some relationship to who you're going to be as a doctor, and it's all not the case. You have to work hard and you have to want it, and I think those attributes far outweigh your grades and your MCAT score. That being said, obviously you need to have some base level of intelligence, but I don't think it's some crazy level of intelligence. I don't think you have to be that astronaut. I think you probably can do it if you want to, if you work hard enough.
So where do you think this is going to go in the next, let's say, 3 years?
So residency is a beast. So I'm trying really hard to put some of my work together in a cohesive, either novel or like didactic book, or potentially graphic novel. I have a lot of ideas. I just don't have the time to execute, but I do have a wealth of work that I have built up. So I'm hoping to kind of put that together in some cohesive way and get that out there.
And as you said, residency is a beast, but your drawings are really amazing. I'm sure you get asked to be on podcasts, you get asked to, be featured on blogs, and I'm sure you get asked to be in different events all the time. How are you able to balance all of this stuff? And if you are, give us a life hack, piece of technology that you're using to make your life a little bit easier.
It's first of all, it's been so flattering and really such an honor to like we're talking with you today. It's amazing, and I'm so happy to do it. But you're right, like it's really tough to kind of spice up your time, and I think in medical school you quickly learn that the way I see it is like most normal human beings not in medicine have kind of their time is chunked up into kind of thirds. Like they have a third of their day they're working, and then they have the rest of the day where they can go to the gym and they can go see their friends and get a drink and they can get 8 hours of sleep. In medicine, it seems like you kind of have two without the three. Like you work all day, and then you'd have to either kind of give up going to the gym and or something social and or some hours of sleep if you wanted to kind of do everything, and which is not really feasible. So, the days I just don't feel it and I'm just exhausted, which is most, I lay in my bed and I, have a beer and I watch some TV and I go to sleep. And I have to accept that because that's just kind of, I wouldn't be able to be a good intern if I didn't have that. But I find that I draw it's such an extension of myself that it doesn't really take as much time. Some pieces obviously do, but sometimes I just draw and it happens. And sometimes I draw because I need to for my mental stability. So that kind of factors.
I'm jealous. I'm still drawing in stick figures, man. So
hey, I'll tell you, it works. It works. Stick figures do have the same purpose. It's about the process, not so much the product sometimes. But it's true. It's true. But in terms of like trying to find time to do other things, I actually, as honored as I am to have all these opportunities, they're not flowing, at a crazy rate. They kind of come in packets, and if the time allows, I do them, and if it doesn't, if it's at any expense of my training as a physician or as to a detriment to my patients, I won't do it. And so far, it's really I've been blessed because it's been balanced quite well for me. So I'm pretty happy.
Okay, Dr. Mike Natter, I asked this question to all my guests at the end of the show. It's a hashtag. It says, "I'm not just a doc, I'm a." So I present to you, I'm not just a doc, I'm a
patient first, I'm a diabetic, I'm an artist, I'm a friend, I'm a son, I'm a person.
Excellent answer. We've never had that before, and that truly is and describes you. So Dr. Mike Natter, Mike, love the fact that you're on the show. I think a lot of people are going to learn a lot from you. Obviously, from an attending level, learning how to be free and just, express who you are. And then from a pre-med and med student level, understanding that, we all struggle through, but ultimately it's really about your heart and your dedication and really about your passion. So you truly are a doc outside the box. I can't wait to see what's going to happen for you in the future. And listen, man, we got to have you on the show in like maybe a year or so and just see how far things are going with you.
Let's do it, man. Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's such an honor, and I love chatting with you. And it sounds like we have a lot in common too. We should catch up more frequently.
When I'm in New York, man, I might have to hit you up, man.
Hit me up. Let's do it. You play some ball?
Yeah, I do. But if you ask my wife, she calls me Kobe Bryant ain't. So hey, don't laugh too hard, man. Don't laugh too hard. Well, that's a wrap for episode 57 with Dr. Mike Natter. Definitely got to thank him again for his time. I know he's really busy juggling residency and everything else that he has going on. I really hoped you enjoyed hearing his Docs Outside the Box journey, as well as his key to success. Plenty of things to get from this episode. If you love this episode, then make sure you share it on social media. Screenshot wherever you're listening and share on Instagram, Twitter, as well as Facebook. Now, you know, Instagram is where it's at nowadays. That's where I'm at most of the time. So I really love it if and when you share your IG stories, especially. Remember, you can tag me at Docs Outside the Box, all the words, Docs Outside the Box, or just use the hashtag I'm Not Just a Doc. I'll find you and I'll go ahead and repost that screenshot. Wherever you're listening, make sure you're subscribed. If you're on Apple Podcasts, go ahead and hook me up with a review. Preferably 5 stars, all right? And I may just read it on the next episode, all right? So thank you all for the reviews. I truly, truly appreciate all of them. Also, one last thing, make sure you join Docs Outside the Box Nation Facebook group. All you have to do is go to Facebook, search Docs Outside the Box Nation, or go to docsoutsidetheboxnation.com. That's D as in dog, OTB as in boy, nation.com. And that will take you directly to the Facebook group. Look, we'll chat again in episode 58. I'm going to catch you then. But just remember one thing. We only got one life. Let's make it count and live outside the box. Peace.